And we often use the term human these days as an excuse for what we do wrong. I'm only human. I can kind of understand that people do that because we live in a post-fall reality, and the new normal, that is the abnormal creation after Genesis 3, people think that that's definitive of humanity. But humanity is God's idea. So when we're thinking about what is to be human, we need to be thinking about what God most intends for that, rather than what we have to put up with because things have gone wrong. And so how am I becoming more human through God's transforming, sanctifying work within me? If I'm saying I want to be like Jesus, I'm saying I want to become more fully human.
Today, I'm with Dr. Vince Bacote. Vince is professor of theology and the director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. Vince is the author of several books, most recently, Reckoning with Race and Performing the Good News in Search of a Better Evangelical Theology. That's Brill 2020. Vince also is the co-creator of a documentary called Black Plus Evangelical, and you can watch that at blackevangelicals.com. Vince, it's good to be with you.
Great to be with you.
Well, today we're going to talk about an essay that you wrote for the Institute for Faith, Work, and Culture here at RTS in 2024. And so that was on the doctrine of creation as it relates to work. And as we think about the faith and work conversation, we were talking before we hit record, and that is you've been involved at some level in the faith and work conversation for quite some time. And I'm wondering, can you remember when that started or how that came about?
It all really goes back to, I think, general engagements around theology and culture, theology and politics, and just also being aware that part of this larger reality of Christians connecting faith to life has to include work. And so while being aware of it, and certainly hearing conversation about vocation here at Wheaton College, I think those things sort of slowly, I think, brought me into it. But then eventually, doing things with the Acton Institute, like teaching for Acton University, getting connected with like Made to Flourish and those types of organizations, and occasionally being involved with some events like that, being involved with the Quran Forum, and doing some different talks for them, and still being on the board of Quran, actually. All those things are part of it. And even like doing some things with Matthew Kamink, like the thing that he and Corey Wilson have done, our Worship for Workers, being part of that conversation as well. And for me, there's this one big thing, which is if somebody says, "Hey, Vince, what's your elevator speech?" It is, I help people build bridges between faith and life, which is a version of theology and ethics being together is really what it is. Which means that to be Christian is to not just worship and then you kind of in an ad hoc way discern how you go about your life once you get out of church, but that our formation ought to be orienting us towards thinking about how we ought to live and how we show up Christianly in everywhere. And of course, there's all these hours of the week where people spend at work. And I sometimes say to my students, actually, I probably at least once a year say it to at least one class. I'll say, when you get out of here, what discernible difference is being Christian going to make when you get out of here? And when you're showing up in your places of work, what is being Christian going to mean besides evangelism in those places? Besides creating a bridge for evangelism. Evangelism is obviously important. People need to meet Jesus. But once they've met him, what does it mean to live like you belong to him in those places? And so helping people to discern, that's really important to me.
Yeah, that's so good. So your role as a professor at Wheaton gives you the opportunity to begin equipping disciples as you send them out in all of life to integrate faith and life. And you are a Kuyper scholar. And so it makes sense also that not only in your role and vocation as teacher, but then also folks are inviting you to speak in because of this resurgence of neo-Calvinism, but particularly in this case, Abraham Kuyper and his teaching on this whole life view.
Yes, very, very true. And whether I'm preaching, teaching, lecturing, it's always in there somewhere.
It's always, exactly.
And of course, you said neo-Calvinism. It was important that, we clarify for listeners.
Yes,
we
good.
don't mean people were calling the new Calvinism 15 years ago. This isn't about people that are reading more Edwards than Kuyper, and Baptists who become 5-point Calvinists soteriologically.
Yes,
No, I
yes.
mean it's this movement emerging out of the Netherlands in the 19th century, late 19th century, that's really about a faith that isn't merely about what you confess, but about, as Kuyper put it, a world and life system. And then neo-Calvinism meant it wasn't actually a compliment at first, right? Neo means, oh, you're one of those people, but it became a label that people embraced. And so but that's very much a part of the fabric of what I do.
Yeah, that's great. Now, the essay that you wrote, you started off where the Bible starts, which is Genesis 1. It's always good to start at the beginning. And you describe Genesis 1 not just as the origins, which of course it is, but also as this kind of first Great Commission, similar to the so-called Great Commission in Matthew 28. And so this Great Commission in Genesis 1 is a call to steward all things, including the work of your hands, of course. And so how does starting with creation, as you're thinking about teaching in faith and life, which work is a part of, how does starting with creation change the way Christians think then about all of life and particularly their work?
Sure. Well, first, once we help people to understand that the doctrine of creation isn't merely being captive to conversations that happened after Darwin took a trip on the HMS Beagle, right? Because a lot of times the conversations about creation are really about, if God made it, how did he make it? In other words, it's about how did it show up, right? And that's an important conversation, but the Bible wasn't written thinking about Charles Darwin. So that's the first thing, right? So yes, let's talk about the fact that God made it. We can have those conversations about how people are navigating creation, evolution. It's great, but what about the fact that there is a creation? And the whole First Great Commission piece is a way of saying, how do you think about God in Genesis 1:26 saying, let's make humans in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the creation? Now, that sounds like a big job, ruling over the creation, hence First Great Commission. So it's not just about reproduction and agriculture. It obviously includes agriculture. It's kind of inescapable if you read Genesis 2. But it's really about the entirety of managing this creation. In other words, but it's still God's creation, hence stewardship. Because sometimes people say that language of dominion, depending on the translation that they're reading. And they have this idea that is like ruling, and a lot of times people think it means ruling in a kind of selfish way. But who's the one giving them the command? God's the one giving the command. It's not like God saying, hey, there's going to be this thing called deism where I create the world and then I go on permanent vacation and you do whatever you want. I don't care. You'll see my fingerprints and you can do CSI and learn about me. But after that, I'm gone. Right. That's not at all what the vibe is. Right. I think God is engaging them. But he's saying, okay, essentially, hey, humans, you're the crown of creation. You have this responsibility, this opportunity to manage my world. And so I'm giving you the responsibility to be the rulers because I'm the big ruler. You are responsible to me, the big ruler. But now you have the responsibility for stewarding, managing this. And so that's really why I like to make sure I'm using the language stewardship there, so people understand that it's not about looking at the world and seeing what you can use and destroy, but it's really how we're engaging all of it. Now, of course, that engagement requires us doing something. So the things that when we think about work, we are working in and with God's creation in the various kinds of jobs that we have, even if it's something that's interpersonal, like a lawyer and a client sitting across the table, or whether it is literally somebody in agriculture or someone in a factory or something like that, working, people working, quote unquote, with their hands. But all of those things are part of our engagement with the world. It's part of what it is to be human. And God says it's part of your management of the whole world. Sounds like a great commission to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's so helpful. I think one of the things that, as I've experienced talking with people, two things have happened as they read the beginning of Genesis, is that you have Genesis 1, Genesis 2, obviously Genesis 3, we have the fall of mankind. And then most of the Bible lives with that reality, right? So we can begin to come to Genesis and ask good questions, but not the primary questions that Genesis 1 and 2 is speaking to. And so I think it's so true in my experience. In a post-Darwin world, people are engaging Genesis 1 and 2 in a way that it wasn't meant to speak in directly, right? And so if we think about the original audience, it's actually even more profound than the way we tend to treat Genesis, that, God is uncontested in all of creation. All human beings bear his image. The work of our hands is a stewardship given by God to human beings to then steward all of creation and what we learn, technology and government. And I mean, you could go on and think about what it means to see this good world and to develop it as human beings to the glory of God. And to your point, it's massive, it's huge, and it has direct implication to what it means to be human even today.
Yes. It's inescapable, really. I think in a way, because we take for granted things around labor and work, and because of arguably the introduction of, I use this word, toil after the fall.
Yes.
The adding of labor to work, if you will, that sense of it makes people think, okay, well, it's what I got to do. But it's almost like the way I used to think about things when I was in elementary school. Okay, I got to go to school and I got to go do these things, but then I get to get out of school, and then the good part of life is when I get out of school. When I get to go to the playground before I go home, or go home and then go to the playground, or go play football with my my neighborhood friends, etc. That's the fun part. That's the good life. The rest of this is what you have to do. And of course, have to do, meaning that, do it, but don't expect to have any specter of positivity about it.
Yeah. Let's go there. That's good. I mean, obviously after Genesis 3, there is this introduction of work as toil, thorns and thistles and sweat. And yet, clearly, as you continue to read, work is still good. The world is still good, though fallen. And so you pick up on this, is that it's good and fallen. And so with this view in mind, how can Christians hold together, not drift into despair on one hand, as you were talking about, and not expecting anything good in terms of experience or fruit, and on the other hand, not to lean so far into the goodness of work that they have some type of naive idealism about work and begin to worship it or expect too much of it? I just wonder, how could we hold that tension?
Well, first, I think it's important for us to understand that in looking at Genesis 3, that people understand that the fall is not a gateway to utter futility. God doesn't say that now, good luck. If you can find something fruitful, good luck, because it's mostly going to be weeds, thorns, and thistles. It's like, no, now there's complication that's introduced by the fall rather than futility introduced by the fall. Childbirth still happens. Now there's labor and pain involved, but childbirth still happens. That's a good thing. And moreover, if you think about it, Psalm 8, when it looks back to Genesis 1, to that first Great Commission, it's not looking back saying, look at what we had, too bad the fall made us lose it. No, it's a sense of an awe that God has given us this opportunity as humans to be the people that are over his creation. It is a sense of wonder and amazement about that. That remains. And I think there is this line we have to walk between utter pessimism about work and the idolatry of work. And I think depending upon the kind of job someone has, they might be only pessimistic. I'm sitting here and I'm just, turning the same screw for 8 hours, etc. And, it's so boring. Is there any dignity to this, etc.? And I think we have to acknowledge that some jobs, because of being repetitive, they may not allow people to be as creative, to use their responsibility in certain ways. But I think there is a question of how do we help people to think about, okay, the job that you're doing, is a job you're doing just to perform a function, or is it connected to something bigger? And I think it's connected bigger. Does that make you want to do what you're doing well? Because you're doing something that hopefully, if you're on an assembly line, that you want to be part of great quality control, right? And so you want to be doing your best with that. But and also, if you're working with other people, what about those relationships? What kind of coworker do you want to be? If you're a person who's a good coworker who might move up into management, how do you want to be the manager when you get there? So I think there are ways of thinking about what's around the work itself that are also important to help us to see, oh, wait, there is possibility here more than just drudgery. The flip side, of course, is somebody who's like really loving what they do. Oh, I just love what I do. That's great. But one, first of all, recognize that no matter what you do that you love, there's a grind there regardless. Like I always think about if somebody's an excellent opera singer, or I'm a mediocre electric bassist. If I was a professional bassist, there's still a grind dimension. At the very least, if you're going around doing touring, because first of all, most of the day you're not playing live, and so there's all the things you're doing, but also you got to keep working up your skills, and you've got to keep up your chops. All this type of thing. There's these things you have to do to maintain a level of excellence, right? And so some of that might just seem like a grind. It's not necessarily fun, but what you've got to do to be able to excel in a certain way. And whether it's music or whether it's something you're doing in the corner office or anything in between, the grind is there, even if there's a lot of delight there as well. I think it's really important that when people are enjoying what they're doing, that they don't make too much of it, because you're not going to do this all day, every day, and you're not going to necessarily even be doing it, in what Mark Roberts calls, the third of life. You might find yourself at a certain point go, okay, well, what happens if I'm retired? What if I'm in an industry like people say about Wall Street? Nobody gets a gold watch, right? You wind up getting fired rather than promoted at some point around like late 30s, early 40s or something. And so if you like that, but it's not an industry that's loyal. Or people say sometimes, corporations aren't loyal to people, right? They're loyal to shareholders or something like that. Well, you might love it, but loving it doesn't mean it's going to love you back all the time. So I think we had to be aware of the fact that whatever we're in, it's not a perfect thing. It's an imperfect thing. And also, it's not something that can ever give to us what God himself gives to us. I think one of the great challenges for human beings in all kinds of dimensions of life after Genesis 3 is wanting to make more of the things God puts into creation rather than looking to God himself for those things. So it's important for us to make sure that we're not getting that confused, even if we're enjoying what we're doing.
Yeah, so good. I mean, it just strikes me that there really are two ditches in a fallen world as we as human beings see the world through. One is to place the problem with something in creation, which would be a bad thing. It's actually no creation is good. It's sin that distorts creation. And then the other thing would be to look for salvation from something in creation, whether that's work or relationships or anything of the kind. And so work, as we just described it, the way you described it is those are the two ditches, the way that what can we expect versus what do we demand. And it reminds me of Dorothy Sayers' article on Why Work, when she speaks to maybe some of the drudgery or the need for excellence and discipline, when she says that we ought to be able to serve the work and not demand that the work serve us. So it's this idea of what is it for? How do we zoom out and, as you said, see it as a part of something larger, both glorifying God, but also serving our neighbor. And I would imagine that many people who are listening to this, they may be in a situation where they are so far removed from the person that they're serving in terms of an end product. And yet one of the beautiful things about the Christian faith is that we have this meta view. We have this understanding that's broad, that isn't only what is right in front of us, but also it has an end. It has a teleology. It has a purpose that we're a part of. And so hopefully some of those things can can place us, can situate us in all of life and also our work. Now, as I'm thinking about someone who's listening to the conversation, there are some authors in the faith and work literature that get nervous, maybe over-indexing for or over-emphasizing the goodness of human work related to creation or protology, and they want to pay more attention to how things are changing now that the kingdom has come. We live in the already, the not yet, and they want to look toward the last things to inform our view of work. Now, my question would be, how might you respond to that? Or to say it another way, why do you think that it is really important that we center the doctrine of creation as we reflect on work?
Sure. Well, I think I'm glad you asked the question that way, because to me, it's very important for people to understand that creation and redemption are not at odds with each other. A lot of times the way the story of the gospel gets told is like, well, there was creation and then, it just got bad. But thank God for Jesus, who showed up to make salvation possible and take us out of this mess. And here's the problem with, I think, that view is that it seems to forget that Jesus is incarnate. Now, Jesus being incarnate means that he identifies with being a human being, humans, the crown of creation. And so if Jesus is showing up in a body, dies in a body, resurrected in a body, then how can God be against what he made when it's really he's showing how committed he is to what he made?
That's good.
And so it's really important for our view of redemption, our eschatology, to be connected to all of that. And I think what I would say is that creation, if you will, is a way for us to think about, first of all, the fact that God made something and said it was very good and never vetoed that. Right? Complication means that God stopped saying it's his, and they stopped saying, well, still to me, it's my very good creation. It's gone sideways, but I'm remedying that. I'm reclaiming that. I'm going to, transform that, in the end. And so, in fact, I sometimes like to say to people, if you celebrate Easter, or actually you celebrate Christmas and Easter, you can't be thinking that creation is the problem and that God and that salvation is mainly about us escaping this. It's really more about how now God's showing us that he's committed to this. He's telling us he's going to ultimately transform this, the creation groaning for its redemption type language that we see in Romans 8, for example. And so what does that mean for us in terms of work? I think what it means is, yes, I think about creation as helping me to see God's, view of this as good, the purposefulness in what we do, the opportunity for purposefulness that we have. Soteriology means that people who are made alive by God are the ones who have eyes to see that reality and to recognize that. And not only see that, but as people who are being transformed, in this process of sanctification, that the kind of people we are becoming, transformed humans. I like to use the language of rehumanization to talk about what is becoming of us. That, in fact, if a person says, I want to be like Jesus, you're saying a couple of things that people may not recognize. You're saying, one is, I'm saying, I want to become as human as possible, is what I want to do. And we often use the term human these days as an excuse for what we do wrong. I'm only human. I can kind of understand that people do that because we live in a post-fall reality, and the new normal, that is the abnormal creation after Genesis 3, people think that that's definitive of humanity. But humanity is God's idea. So when we're thinking about what is to be human, we need to be thinking about what God most intends for that, rather than what we have to put up with because things have gone wrong. And so how am I becoming more human through God's transforming, sanctifying work within me? If I'm saying I want to be like Jesus, I'm saying I want to become more fully human. In the same way, I also like to say, if somebody says, I want to be like Jesus, you're also saying you want to be a holy person. You want to live like you belong to God. I sometimes say this, how many of you will say, I want to be like Jesus, right? So all the hands will go up. They'll say, okay, how many of you you often say, I want to be holy. It's almost like I'm just waiting for the crickets to hear that, right?
Yes.
Because people think holiness means being quite peculiar and strange in ways that you don't want people to think that you're peculiar and strange, because you think it has to do with certain kinds of dress codes or certain ways of being so buttoned down, right? When really, holiness is living like you belong to God, living like you're His, living like you want to be like Jesus. It's the same thing. And so it's important, I think, for us to think about, all right, if I'm going to be that person, how is that showing up? And how's that showing up in how I'm looking at the world, which means, and even what we were saying earlier, I can participate in work without worshiping it. I can be thankful for it without having to make an idol of it, without trying to get too much from it, while appreciating it, what's available to me with opportunities for work. But ultimately, I'm this person who's wanting to be like what God wants a human to be in His world. And I'm trying to do that everywhere that I am, which means it has to be happening in the world of work, all these hours of the week. And that's the kind of thing where I think if somebody's thinking about, especially if you're in management, if you're a person who really plays a role in forming a company's culture, then what are you doing to make it a more humanizing place? Right. And I sometimes wonder, when people are talking about, say, like the shareholder reality, let's say, where sometimes people go, well, X, Y, Z happens because of shareholders. I wonder how many companies in their stated commitments, yes, you want to make money, I get it, but are you thinking about being humanizing while you're also thinking about making money? And is there a way that you can show that commitment and show that that commitment isn't always antithetical to, a certain thing around shareholder value? Does that conversation even come up? Now, I imagine in some places it does, but that doesn't seem to be the word on the street. The rumors wouldn't be that way, right? The rumors are about serve the ends of the almighty dollar in our country, and let that idolatry essentially lead people to want to make as much as possible, and then as long as people are serving that, it's great. To the extent that they're not, they're expendable. Well, what about actually thinking about how am I, even amid all kinds of transitions with technology, et cetera, how am I trying to think about the kind of humanness we can have in the environments that we create for people that are involved in that work?
Yeah. Would you say that it's fair to say that as a Christian, maybe those who are listening to this, they have some type of influence. Maybe they're a manager. They're on their way to work. They're about to lead a meeting. They're about to make a decision. There's a policy reality, an HR reality, something like that. So it's understandable to say something like, what would Jesus do if He were me? Makes sense. Okay. What's Christian about this? How do I express holiness, to your point, because I belong to Jesus? So how do I represent Him in this situation? Another way to get at that as Christians is to ask, what is human about this situation? Or how do I view these image bearers, whether they're Christians or not? How do I love them as first being called to be human beings, because they are creatures created in the image of God? And that also is a way to ask yourself the question, what's Christian about this? You first have to say, what's human about this? Because Christians never stop being human. In fact, as you said, sanctification is becoming more fully human. Yeah. So would it be fair to also add that as people think about it? It's like, what's human about this, or inhuman or dehumanizing?
Yes. No, I think that's great. And I think as we're asking those questions, our answers don't have to be what I would call realized eschatological answers. In other words, and I will tell you exactly like it's going to be in the realized kingdom of God, because I am the one person who's been given the vision of exactly what it's going to look like. Don't put that weight on yourself. The choices aren't either just go with conform to the status quo or have some vision of this is exactly what it's like. It's really bad history of people thinking that they knew exactly what it was going to look like. So we don't need to put that ridiculous weight on ourselves. But we can be asking, at the very least, how am I showing that we're trending toward that? Yes. Right? And trending toward that not being an excuse to accommodate with other things. But the point is that how am I trying, maybe in an experimental way, to see how do I see what's human about this? What can be more human
Yeah.
about this? Right. That way we don't have this anvil on our head about, well, I mean, I've got to get it right or God's going to be mad, etc. It's like God knows that we're limited. If Paul said that, we see through the glass darkly, what does that mean for us? Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
we do, no matter how sanctified we are. We see some things. There's a lot more things for us to see that we don't yet understand. And so how am I, in my growing understanding, getting a better sense of what this is and what this might be, if I have that possibility of being the person that can be shaping the culture.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. It reminds me of what Steve Garber, an author in the faith and work space, calls proximate living, essentially.
Yes.
So we love approximately. My love for my wife, your love for your wife, or our neighbors in general will never be perfect. But to your point, what is it trending? And this is the story of sanctification too, is that there's this general growth. We experience it differently, right? Never perfectly. And so to lean into sanctification, to lean into holiness, as you've been describing it in the workplace, we shouldn't expect that to be any different than we experience all of our life. I mean, there's something about God, for some reason, who he seems to love development. We see it at creation. All things are good, but not perfect. They're not finished. And of course, he could have done whatever he wanted, but sanctification is the same way. We are in Christ. We are righteous. It's an act of God's free grace. But growth in that holiness is a work over time. And there's something about that we are very uncomfortable with oftentimes. And yet God seems to hold space for that.
Yes, absolutely. It's a funny thing. I think sometimes Christians think, hey, can I just have this experience and, and okay, all right, what's done needs to be done. And I can just walk around in what would be kind of like a certain Wesleyan conception of entire sanctification, right? Perfect love for God, and I do everything out of perfect love for God, but also that which is not, this part is not necessarily Wesleyan, and I have perfect knowledge. But that's not the way that God does it. I mean, we see that it is definitely a process. We pressing forward. I mean, Paul talks about running a race to win, right? And, reaching forward to something he's not yet, grasped fully, then certainly we need to be recognizing that that's going to be the case for us as well.
Yeah, so good. In your article, you suggest that sanctification isn't just about personal growth and holiness, but it's about pursuing flourishing for others, that this is what it means to be a human being. And so I'm curious, as taking that in mind, the last question, what I want you to hold in your mind is, maybe someone is listening to this podcast right now on the way to the office, on the way home from work, reflecting on their lunch break, or listening to it doing dishes, but just underneath the surface is a workplace reality that's sort of bubbling up as they listen. So with this more comprehensive understanding of sanctification in the workplace, how might you speak to that person right now? Like, what might it look like for them to bring flourishing to their offices, schools, workplaces tomorrow morning?
Sure. The thing I would say is there one person or one thing you can think of? It doesn't have to be a big thing, right? But one thing you can do that is, one, in terms of your own disposition, showing up in a particular way, but also ways that you can be having your antenna up to seek to make something a little bit better. And that sounds very modest, right? But I think it's better to go with the modest approach than to say, I want you to think about utter transformation of your entire workspace. I love the vision. Okay. I mean, I'm kind of a vision oriented person myself, but in terms of day to day, I think it's important for us to think, okay, is there something I can notice? Is there something that I already have noticed? Something I've been thinking about doing that might be a way that, okay, I'm at least bringing help flourishing to one other person, which can be as simple as someone that's having a difficult time of it. Is there a way I can help this person? is there a way that I can just ask this person how I can be helpful to them? Sometimes just letting people know that somebody's even aware that they're going through it, that they're feeling the weight of it. That alone sometimes is the thing, right? But other times, there may be either something that we can do because of our position allows it, or because it's literally a tangible thing that you can do for another person that will help bring flourishing to them, in the workspace. And so I say, think about the one thing, and rather than having to be a gigantic thing. I mean, if there's a gigantic thing you have in mind, there's a little bit you can do to begin moving that ball down the road. That's also cool. But what's one thing that you can have your attention tuned to, or have your antenna up and be ready to step into something when the opportunity presents itself? That's what I recommend.
Yeah, I like that. As you were talking, the phrase came in my mind that a sort of redemptive consistency is always better than a redemptive intensity, right? Consistency over time, as opposed to thinking that intensity is the only way. But what is a 1 degree shift today look like, and then tomorrow and the next week? And over time is now on your side, so to speak. It's going to happen anyway. But these 1 degree shifts with paying attention and having eyes to see and keeping in step with the Spirit is really a meaningful thing, and we should not frown upon it.